Welcome to this video. Today we'll be looking at the difference between being stockfish and being human, and why it sometimes can be a bit misleading to always trust the stockfish evaluation. So take a look at this position. Right now, after the move pawn to h4, stockfish gives this position as +2 for white. And to me this is very surprising. White is 2 pawns down. I know that black has some misplaced pieces, and also we're hitting the queen right now, but still, being 2 pawns down and winning, that's the evaluation of stockfish right now. So that can be quite hard to understand. But let's try to look at the position and what's going on. So let's say black plays a very obvious move here. Play a move like queen f5, intending to trade the queens. Let's say we trade, we take back. Now in the end game, it's very useful to be pawns up. So maybe this is not so bad for black. But Stockfish wants to play queen to e7 here. The point being, if black now plays knight to c6, hitting the queen on e7, we can take bishop takes c6, because there is a pin here. So if d takes c6, we can play queen takes a7, white is a rook up, and white is winning. So instead, black can play a move like queen to e6, intending again to trade the queens, because in such positions, when you're material up, you want to stabilize. But here, white can now take on c5, and after a move like knight c6, if this was my own game, I would think, okay, there's a good chance of this being a draw, because if we now take this knight, bishop takes c6, we'll play rook to c7, pinning the bishop and the queen, and it looks like black should be okay. But no, Stockfish simply plays rook to d6, hitting the queen, attacking also the knight, and after a move like queen to e7, the idea being that now if rook takes c6, hitting the queen, if we now recapture, the rook on a7 is now protecting the queen on e7. But no, Stockfish plays rook to d6, queen e7, and simply plays positional chess, plays pawn to h5. And it claims that white is winning here. So personally, I would find this very hard to believe that I was winning in a human game here. And also for most players that are not playing at a 3700 level, it can be misleading if you check your game afterwards and it says +2 here. But of course, if you play the best moves, you are winning. But in a human game, probably you're just much better, or at least slightly better here. You have a lot of initiative. Of course, your rooks are doing great on d2 and d1. And your bishop is better than the knight. But still, you're 2 pawns down. And in a game, for most players, this would be quite unclear. Let's now take a look at another position. So in this position, where there is opposite colored bishops, Stockfish claims that after rook to b3, defending the pawn on c3, white is +3.5. And when I was looking, it was actually going up, so it was climbing up to 3.8. Which I find quite amazing. So this is from my own game. I played in the Danish championships. And here it is clear that white is 1 pawn up. But it's also opposite colored bishops. So this means if we trade this rook here for the rook on e7, it's very likely that the game will end in a draw. But Stockfish claims that you can simply avoid trading the rooks and just improve your position. White has bad pawns on f7, f6, and h7. And in the game you can continue with king g2 and f4, and eventually white will win. Also, something quite important here is of course that we have the open b file. Like we have this rook here on b3, staring down this b file, controlling the game. So in general, during the game, I thought that I'm much better. I have good winning chances, but for this position to be +4, I think it's not really like us humans think. Of course, there is almost no counterplay here, and if you can avoid changing the rooks and avoid getting into some counterplay for black, white should be winning, but it's still quite a far way. And I think also almost +4 in this position is misleading for a lot of players. Anyways, let's look at quickly what happened in this game. So after rook to b3, my opponent played h6, very logical, placing the pawn on another square than the white bishop. I played king g2, improved my king position, and after a move like bishop c7, which happened in the game, I played rook to b7, king to f8, and rook a7. I activated my rook, and I went on to win the game. After king e8, I activated my king, and also this weakness on h6 is quite tremendous. But it's still hard for me to say. I know, of course, I'm a grandmaster, and also I played a fairly good game, I would say myself. But I think it can easily go wrong, this position. If you just trade the rooks, all of a sudden it's no longer winning. So you have to play quite careful to win the game. In the end, I managed to win this pawn on c6. So maybe Stockfish is correct. I mean, the position was winning, especially now that I have this pawn on c4, where I can put the bishop on d5. Now I would believe if it was like +3. But before, in this position, it's quite surprising to me that black actually has no real defense. Let's now take a look at another game. This is my game against Peter Lecco from the European Club Cup in 2018. And here it's quite amazing that black has a way of being -4.5. And he didn't find this in the game. But if black plays bishop to d... I play bishop c6 first, sorry. He can play bishop to d2, hitting my rook. I have to move my rook. I could go rook d1. Now if black plays bishop to e3, pinning the king, attacking the pawn on f2, I have to defend with rook to f1, and he puts the bishop on d4. This position is -4.5. Can you believe it? You have the same amount of material, but black will simply push his pawns, playing e5, playing f5, and e4, and white has no defense. And I mean, it's logical maybe when you see it, but it's still quite amazing that white can't do anything here. Black will not even use time to take the pawn on b3. He will simply activate the pawns and the king and win the game. So I was a bit shocked when I saw that, but in the game, luckily for me, he played rook takes b3, and I played rook to c2. And now I'm only slightly worse, although the endgame is very tough. I'm simply a pawn down, and it was a tough defense, where I ended up losing the game. Let's now take a look at what I think is a real 0-0 position. So here, both sides has 3 pawns and a rook each, and there is no play left in this position. This is going to be a draw 99% of the time. There is simply no way to win this position, and this is what I think of when we consider 0.0. Let us now take a look at another position. So here Stockfish evaluates this at 0.07. So in contrast to the other example, it's not much of an increase, and white has a whole extra pawn here. And the reason for this is that, of course, the engine will make a draw in this position, because the engine is very good at rook endgames. Also, most grandmasters will probably make a draw in this game, in this position, but I know a lot of people that would lose this position. Even some grandmasters have lost here before, and especially if black plays a mysterious move, let's say king f3, and black plays like rook to a6. If white can get in g4, the pawn on h7 will be left with some trouble, because now it's harder to play h5. And white here has some chances. But if black plays after king f3, h5, This is a better drawing setup, but although I would still not consider this an equal position like the Indian does, I would think that you can now play the game for maybe 100 moves as white. You can try some different things, you can play back and forth, and maybe your opponent will make a mistake and you can win the game. But 0.07 I think is quite misleading for the vast majority of players. Let us now take a look at another 000 position. So I played this game in Italy, in Vegani Cup, and here I played the move knight to c6. And even though my rook is attacked here on e3, I decided to hit his rook on b8. And here it's very tempting for black to take my rook here on e3. It's simply a rook hanging. But remember, the position is 000 for the Indian. But this is quite a different 000 than the position we had before in the rook endgames. So here the game is very complicated, and already after one move, bishop takes e3, already black is worse now, because I played the move pawn takes f3. And as you can see, the game is very complicated, even though the Indian thought it was more or less a draw. But that's not how it is in the human games. Now I'm threatening to take the rook on b8. I'm also threatening a fork with knight to e7 check. And the game continued. Bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, and this taking the knight was actually a huge mistake. And it might seem a bit surprising because the knight was so annoying, but now the pawn on c6 is really strong. And black will get into a lot of trouble. So just in 2 moves, we went from 0.0 to +1 for white. Of course, white now has to play some good moves. He played knight to c5. I played my rook to f1, hitting this knight on f6 and putting pressure. He played knight to e8, logical, getting out of the attack. And now I played bishop to d5, attacking the pawn on f7, and preparing to put at some point the pawn on e4, so I will have a protected bishop on e5. The game continued knight to e6. I played knight c4, putting more pressure on the black pawns. He played rook to b5, and I now supported my bishop with pawn to e4. And now you can see all my pieces are very well placed, and I have this very strong passed pawn on c6. And here it's almost impossible for black to defend. In the game he played rook c7. I took on e5, and there is always tactics like knight takes f7 coming, and the position is very tough for black. But this is above the point. The point was just that you can have a 0-0 position, which is really complicated, and you can have one that's very dull and can change, and that doesn't really change, like a static one, as you saw in the rook endgame. But here it's very dynamic, and it changed very fast. So here we have another position, this one being 0.2. And this is very close to equal according to Stockfish. But after I played the move pawn to a4, white has a very easy plan to push the a pawn to a7 and try to make a queen. Also, if at some point it's possible for me to trade my dark squared bishop for his dark squared bishop, there will be some holes in the black position. So I would really argue that this position is quite hard for black to draw. Of course, for an Indian it's easy, but in a human game it's tough to be a pawn down, and you have no real prospects of winning the game here because there are a limited amount of pawns. It's quite symmetrical over here, not much is going on. And let's see what happens in the game. Black played the move queen d7, very logical, intending to play rook c8 at some point. Also, take a look at this bishop on a1. It's quite weirdly placed, and after I played queen to a3, it had to move. He played the move bishop to g7, and I continued my plan with a5. Still, the Indian thinks the position is only slightly worse for black, but it's quite hard. Even though the Indian says it should be a draw, you still have to figure out what to do against this a pawn. It's coming, it's marching, and I know that black has the bishop pair, which is usually an edge, but you also have to do something with it. In the game, he played queen to b5, hitting my rook on e2. I moved it back, rook to e1, and he played rook c8. I would also argue that this is quite a logical move. Of course, he could maybe have tried a move like rook to a8, but I can play probably bishop to b4, defending the pawn, and at some point I will play the move h3 and see what happens. I'm still having this pawn up, and black has to do something. He can of course try to wait, but it's unpleasant to play chess like this. So in the game he tried to play more actively. He played the move rook to c8. I played bishop to e5. Again illustrating the point, if we trade this these bishops, if he now takes, I can take back in different ways, but one way is to play rook takes e5, hitting the queen, and I still have this very strong a pawn. So in the game he tried to keep the bishop pair, played bishop to f8, I played queen to a1, played rook to a8, and I played bishop c3, defending the pawn. And already now it's getting really tough for black to defend the game. For example, if he tries to play bishop to b4, intending to trade these bishops so that he can try to take the a pawn, I have a very sneaky move. I can play the move bishop to h8. And now black also has to deal with some threats of queen to g7. Perhaps here he can play bishop to f8, and I'm not completely sure if it's if I have something decisive here. But also there's another option, is to play a move like bishop takes b4, queen takes b4, and I can play rook to e5, defending laterally the pawn on a5, and white is better here. So in the game he tried to play bishop to d5, and I played knight e5, and already he has to watch out for this knight g4 coming to f6 ideas. So he played h5, and after rook b1, he realized that he was in a lot of trouble here, and what appeared to be an equal position before is now turning very unpleasant. He played queen to e8, I kept pushing my pawn, queen to c8, and now the pawn landed on a7, and it will prove decisive very quickly. So what happened in the game is he played queen to f5, trying to get some counterplay, maybe going queen to e4, hitting the pawn on g2, or even sometimes queen to g5. I continued with my plan. I played rook to b8, intending to trade these rooks at some point, and also creating a pin on the black king. So he played queen to g5, I played pawn to g3, and now he actually played the trick, which I had seen, don't worry, but he took my pawn here on a7. And at first it looks like, why did he do that? If I now take, I will be in a terrible danger. I will actually just lose the game. He will play queen to c1, check. My only move is to play bishop to e1, and he can take this bishop, and I'm checkmated. But my whole idea was, after rook takes a7, I can play the move queen to d1, and this pin on the black king, and my queen hitting his bishop on d5 is proving decisive. And after the move bishop to e6, if you want, you can pause the video and try to find a tactic here. It's definitely possible, but I will show it now. It is rook takes f8, king takes f8, and queen to d6, check. And here black is losing, because if he plays the move rook to e7, I have queen to d8, check, hitting the king. Now if he moves the rook to e8, the queen is hanging on g5, winning the game. And if he plays the move king to g7, I have different ways of winning, but the simplest is probably to play knight to f3, hitting the queen on g5, hitting the king on g7, and white is winning. So rook e7 is not possible. Instead, my opponent, he tried to play king to g8. Now I went queen to b8 check, hitting the rook, hitting the king. Only move for black now is to play king to h7. And now comes the final touch of the game, which is not to take this rook on a7, because then black can play queen to c1 check, hitting the bishop, hitting the king, and black has good drawing chances. Instead, now I played the move knight to d3, protecting the c1 square, hitting the rook, threatening queen to h8 mate, and white is winning here. So this was the main point of the video, is to illustrate when you can listen to Stockfish and when it's sometimes there are some differences when you play a human game, and that some positions that Stockfish evaluates as completely winning are not so simple to win in human games. Also, some of the 0-0 positions are quite different. But especially this bishop endgame that we looked at in the start, where white was just one pawn up and the engine says +4, it just makes you think that you still have to be careful. And even if you don't win the position, you shouldn't be so upset, because in a human game, it's not always so easy to convert like Stockfish. So thanks a lot for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment in the video. Bye bye!